Hello, hello Belinda.
Hi.
We have to think about what subjects on the plate today. There are many things that we can talk about, like listening, deep listening. We can talk about meditation, creativity, knowledge, mindfulness. These are all possibilities. Is there anything else that you want to add?
We can talk about religion, a whole lot of stuff.
Religion?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Faith.
Certainly. Where should we start, do you think?
We could start with creativity.
Right, I think that creativity is one of the consequences, one of the results, one of the spin-off benefits of having a peaceful mind. Last time we talked about the relationship between the conscious and the unconscious, and how sometimes the unconscious breaks into consciousness. Now that was imagining the unconscious as something that was connected to the individual, but more than that, connected to the collectivity of individuals, because whilst there might be a level of the unconscious that specifically relates to me and my life, there's another level that is common to humanity that has been called the collective unconscious. If we become attuned to the unconscious, I believe that we'll also start practicing deep listening. That is, when we communicate with each other, we will listen deeply, not just to what's going on the surface, but what's going on at a deeper level. We will hear not only what's being said, but what's not being said. And we do have a tendency as human beings to try to reinforce what we know, to stick with the known and keep regurgitating it instead of opening to what is new. We talked about the unconscious being the unknown. Well, what's new in the interpersonal sphere is what the other person brings to the table, what your interlocutor has to communicate. Because it's only by allowing your own opinions to settle down, and in a sense you're sort of holding them in abeyance, that you're able to hear what another person has to say. And it's all part of the same movement towards self-transcendence as listening to the unconscious. Listening to the other person is part of the same movement towards self-transcendence, getting beyond yourself. And to listen with just not only with the ears, but with the mind and with the heart, and in a sense with the whole body, because so much of what we communicate is communicated non-verbally. Somebody once told me that I think the verbal aspect of communication is only about 7% of communication. About a third more, maybe 38%, is the tone with which we communicate something to each other. That says a lot. The tone is more eloquent than the combination of words that we use. And even more important than tone, perhaps, is body language. Somebody once put the proportion of informational content conveyed in human communication to be over 50%, maybe 53% or something. Body language, how we're sitting and how we're standing and what we're clenching, how we're breathing, how we're leaning, how we're gesticulating. how we might be frowning or smiling or whatever. Definitely we know that there can be a hostile body language and there can be a welcoming body language. All this goes into communication. And I think we all have a sense that good communication is reciprocal. We speak and we listen, and we speak and we listen. It's the same when we are meditating, when the conscious and the unconscious are coming into relationship. We can formulate our concerns, and we do that whenever we draw together our intention or engage in goal-setting behaviour and identify our desires. But then we have to listen as well. What comes from the unconscious? We have to listen to that. We have to be receptive to that. The religious people talk about prayer, which is quite a receptive thing. So you can petition the Almighty, but you must also put yourself in a disposition of listening. So the two aspects of prayer, the active and the passive. And I would explain meditation as a relaxation of the conscious mind so that it can receive the impress of the unconscious. And that's the only way that new content is going to come into the conscious mind, apart from new experience, new sensations, new perceptions, which then have to be organised by the mind. Having good habits around, let's say, meditation will bear fruit in terms of knowledge and creativity. They will condition the way in which we view education as well. In the ancient world, education was considered to be ordered towards the philosophical. The 7 liberal arts that the ancient Greeks and Romans practiced and were carried on in the Middle Ages were to prepare one for philosophical contemplation. In other words, it was quite generalist. What was considered to be an education enabled us to become more human, to become more philosophical. This is over and above any kind of specialised skills that we had to acquire in our trade or profession. Another fruit of good meditation is knowledge. In an earlier episode, I mentioned that we are snowed under with an information barrage coming from the media and from other sources. Information has never been as available as it is today.
Overload.
There is an overload. And just because we have a lot of information at our fingertips doesn't necessarily mean that we have knowledge, let alone wisdom. Now, there is a relationship between information, which ultimately is grounded in sense perception, and knowledge and wisdom and understanding. Back to the ancient Greeks, they had this idea of the 7 liberal arts. There were 3 that formed what was called the trivium, the group of 3, and the 4 that formed the quadrivium, the group of 4. The group of 3 basically consisted of grammar, logic and rhetoric, They trained the mind to think in certain categories and to understand the structure of language. And the group of 4 went into astronomy, music or harmony, geometry and arithmetic. Even today there's a bit of a legacy where we talk about the literacy and numeracy being at a premium in terms of the products of our education system. We expect our students to be turned out literate and numerate. A few generations back, they called it reading, writing, and arithmetic, like the 3 R's. So if you think, I'm just trying to draw a quick arc of tradition here in terms of how we reach generalized philosophical knowledge about the world and life and so on, existence, the universe. We have 5 senses, 5 portals of information: vision, smell, taste, hearing, and touch. These are our portals, our doorways to the external world. From these 5 senses, we gather up information, but we haven't yet made sense of it. If you go back to school, you might remember in geometry there's that 3, 4, 5 Pythagorean triangle. The sides were 3 and 4 and the hypotenuse was 5. So there's the 5 senses. But then to process the information from these 5 senses, we have a group of 3 subjects, the trivium. Today we'd say they're to do with literacy. And a group of 4 subjects, the quadrivium, which today we'd probably say has to do with numeracy, because arithmetic is number pure and simple. Geometry is number in space. What the ancients conceived of as harmony, musical harmonies, was number in time.
Numbers.
Yes, numbers.
It's all about the numbers.
And what they conceived of as the celestial discipline, astronomy, was number in time and space. That's why I say it would probably equate to numeracy in the broadest sense today. So processing the input of our 5 senses, because the world is raining in on us, but we don't know how to make sense of it. There has to be order in the mind, and there has to be logic. And it's interesting because the structure of our language reflects the structure of being in the cosmos. So just as kids in school, and we learn a bit of grammar, and we don't learn as much today, unfortunately, because there's that whole language theory of studying English, where kids are just meant to extract meaning from reading passages without learning about the parts of speech and the nuts and bolts of language. But there's quite a bit of meaning in the nuts and bolts of language. For example, if you look at declensions for nouns, there's a subject case and an object case across many languages, and there's a genitive case that represents possession and so on. And if you look at the world, you have your subjectivity, I, and the object that you look at. And what's the relationship between them? Meditation and knowledge gives us a deeper insight into the relationship between subject and object. Now, I would propose, and again, I don't want to force feed anybody, but I want you to think about what you understand as knowledge. To me, knowledge is a marriage of wisdom and understanding. And from that marriage comes knowledge, and knowledge is applied.
I was about to say application.
Yes. So you've got kind of pure knowledge, and then it's applied in opinions and skills, which brings it very close down. I mean, this is our way of acting on the world. We act on the interpersonal social world through our opinions when we are communicating with other human beings, and we act on the technological world, the world of things, with our skills, what we can do, whether it's something simple like making a piece of toast, or whether it's something complicated like, building a rocket, which is rocket science. Why do I say that knowledge is the marriage of wisdom and understanding? I say that wisdom is the interior aspect of knowledge, and understanding is the exterior aspect of knowledge. You'll probably know many people amongst your acquaintances and friends that seem to have a lot of wisdom. They kind of know things intuitively, but they aren't necessarily capable of communicating or articulating those things to other people. They may have had, credible mystical insights, but you can sit and listen to them, and those mystical insights may have had meaning for them, but it is hard to, what does that mean for me or the next person or for the world or whatever? The interior hasn't been linked up with the exterior in that case. On the other hand, you might have people that know what all the experts say and the latest research in a subject. They've got quite a bit of understanding and they can break it down. But they may not have necessarily integrated it with their own intuitions and life learnings and made it part of the permanent acquisition of self and consciousness. It may not be their insight. They may not have owned those insights. They may sort of belong out there in others or in the field of research or in, the library of books. When we can quieten the conscious mind and relax it and allow it to receive the impress of the unconscious, one of the archetypes there is what you might call the interior teacher. The interior teacher is sometimes associated with the voice of conscience. It can tell us what's right and what's wrong. It can really give us conviction about that. Socrates talked about his inner daimon, an interior teacher, an intelligence within that could guide him in his actions. Religious traditions do also have something analogous. Saint Augustine talked about the Magister Interiori, the interior master. And that voice within can instruct you. You may know what I'm talking about. It can impart wisdom. And when people say, well, how do you know that? Well, it's come from within. You haven't gone and researched it in some library.
It's tried and tested.
It may be tried and tested in your
For you
life.
it is.
Yeah,
For you it is.
it's
yeah.
like I'm convinced.
Because it
But-
worked for me.
Yes,
Yeah.
you may be convinced. If you're listening to your interior teacher, you may be convinced of something.
I've got a very strong intuition.
But I may not be convinced of it because you may not yet have found the means by which to communicate it to me and to link it up to my sources, my reference sources, my sources of knowledge, my sources of experience, which will enable me to have those aha epiphany moments. Oh, I know what you're talking about. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay. So wisdom, if you like, comes from the interior teacher, and this is a component of knowledge, but it's not full knowledge because knowledge has to marry the wisdom to the understanding, because you may think that you've just had the most unique, brilliant, mystical experience and then go on an inflationary trip. There's something special about me. But if you only knew a bit more history or philosophy or theology or a bit more life experience, you would realise that people have been having these experiences since the dawn of time.
That's what I was about to say.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Usually if you get a creative moment,
Yes.
inspired moment, somebody somewhere would have had the same moment
Undoubtedly.
at the same time.
Nothing new under the sun.
No. It's all there for the picking.
So a little bit more understanding would make one a little bit more humble about one's knowledge for a start, but would render one's knowledge more useful as well. Because when you understand something, you can understand how the research in different fields of human endeavour, other people's experience, other people's thinking, reflection.
But I think that once a person has real knowledge,
Have reference to your own, yeah?
they do become quite humble because you realise that how little you really do know, that you are just at the tip of the iceberg.
Well, that's what the oracle at Delphi said about Socrates. It said Socrates was the wisest man in ancient Greece because everybody else thought they knew, but Socrates claimed that he didn't know. So he was in a deep state of receptivity. He didn't know, and because he claimed not to know, and he didn't value what he knew as much, he was deemed to be the wisest man. He'd made a lot of accommodation for the unknown, for things that he didn't know, but was willing to open his mind to.
Absolutely.
So by now you may understand more of what I'm talking about when I say that knowledge, pure knowledge, is the marriage of wisdom and understanding. And having that understanding, knowing how the insights and the fruit of the thought of other people down through the ages relate to what you intuit interiorly, is a lifeline of communication. Because when we're talking to each other, you can say, oh, you know what so-and-so said, or you know what this tradition says. It's been said before, and I can reference that because you may not have had my experience, but you may be familiar with this source over here. And it gives confirmation. It may not engender knowledge, but it can confirm. If there's the inkling of knowledge, it can confirm that knowledge in an individual. And yet, with wisdom and understanding and their union, we are still dealing with pure knowledge. Pure knowledge is basically ontology and metaphysics and epistemology, which are big fancy words that essentially convey pure knowledge is to do with the nature of being, qua being. It's the nature of existence and consciousness and how we know. So before I can know anything, any detailed knowledge or even specialised knowledge in engineering or aesthetics or gardening, there has to be an operating system that orientates me to the universe and tells me how I know what I know. That's called epistemology. Our means of knowledge, our theory for how we know things. And implicitly we do. We have an idea. For example, you might think that we can only know things through the senses. And some of the philosophers, like John Locke, believe that the human mind began as tabula rasa, a blank slate, and you can only know what you acquire from experience in this life. And then you can generalize from that. Others think that you can have knowledge that comes from another domain. So since we live in the computer age, we can use an analogy. A computer has we've talked about the computer having a hardware and a software, just like we have a brain and a nervous system. That's the hardware. That's the material stuff. You know, we can pull it apart, just like we can pull out the wires and the transistors, and the motherboard of a computer. There are bits that go together, which is the material substratum of the thing. But then it has a software, which is the program that runs and does all the clever stuff, the thinking and all the algorithms are embedded in it. Now, in your computer also, you have an operating system or software.
Yeah.
You know, when computers boot up, they need that operating system. But then you also have application software, apps.
And there are different technicians that deal with different aspects of that.
Oh yeah, when you're building
processes,
building systems and building platforms and things. But without the basic operating system, you can't run the apps.
No, you can't.
Now, there are many wonderful, magnificent apps. There are apps for news, there are apps for music, there are apps for photography, there are apps for monitoring your physiology through exercise. There are apps to tell you what's up in the night sky. You can virtually get an app for anything now. But that's application software. Now, analogous to that, we humans have applied knowledge and the general systems operating system, which I'm calling pure knowledge. So knowledge can be pure and applied. And underpinning all of our applied knowledge, whether it's in botany or architecture or engineering or medicine, is our pure knowledge, which answers questions like, what kind of universe am I in? Is it an illusion? Is it real? Am I living in a world am I living in a tragedy, basically, in a world where I'm just a victim of circumstance and things will end badly? Or am I living essentially in a benevolent universe? And how do I know these things?